Hello again. We're going to talk today about functional behavior assessment direct observations. We spoke at length in the last meeting about indirect observations or indirect assessments. We clarified a bit about the difference between functional behavior analysis and functional behavior assessments. So we move on to direct observation today. Now, what's the difference again between indirect and direct observation? Indirect observation are anecdotal reports done in sort of a retrospective manner by a reporter who could be a parent, a guardian, a teacher, a classroom aide about their opinions about things that may or may not have influence on a child's behavior. Direct observations are simply structured ways of recording data that will help to generate a hypothesis about the variables that are controlling the individual's behavior. This is a much better version of ways to conduct functional behavior assessments than the indirect, because you're actually basing your decision around creating a hypothesis and eventually writing a behavior plan on real data and not just someone's retrospective memory. Basically, there are any number of functional behavior assessment options that fall in the category of direct observation. Of course, the first was developed by Bijou, Peterson, and Alt in 1968, which is the antecedent behavior consequence recording sheet, or better known to most of us as ABC sheets. The next was Paul Touchette, Becky McDonald, and Langer in 1985 at their work at the New England Center for Children, where they developed a system that they refer to as a scatter plot. The next are things like echo behavior analysis, functional assessment direct observation form, or the FADO, as they like to call it, which is in the O'Neill book, which is something that I tend to like a lot. And then there's a thing called the Questions About Behavioral Functioning that Johnny Mattson and his colleagues and others have published both in 1999 and 2000. The ABC recording sheet is like an indirect observation, an anecdotal recording in which you write down what happens immediately prior to and following the occurrence of a behavior. That's a quote taken directly from Dermack and Bossert 1996 in their publication Assessing Problem Behavior. This is a typical ABC recording sheet. I'm sure you've all seen hundreds of these. Basically what you do is across the top, and it can be done in any number of ways, you have columns for the time that an event occurs, the setting in which it occurs, which actually I find that many ABC recording sheets lack. Something about the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. Part of the problem with this is you're asking teachers' aides to do it, often is not, or direct care staff. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know that all of them completely understand antecedent or consequence. A friend of mine recently developed an ABC recording sheet where rather than the word antecedent, they put what was going on right before the behavior, and then for consequence, they put what's going on right after the behavior. And behavior doesn't necessarily need to be filled in because the behavior is something you've already targeted, but in this case, things seem to change a little bit. The other is if you look down at 1005, there's no antecedent recorded. For me, in my personal history, this is extraordinarily common that people say, well, there was no antecedent to that behavior. We all know that, of course, there was always an antecedent to the behavior. They may not have noticed it, they may not have picked up on it, but there was an antecedent to the behavior. You know, part of the problem with this ABC recording sheet goes back to what we know about in the animal literature. When Fred Keller and some of his colleagues were first experimenting with schedules of reinforcement, they wanted to know how far out they could stretch a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. And with one particular animal, they were able to get that animal to work on a 50,000 to 1 ratio, which means that the animal had to engage in the behavior the lever press 50,000 times before it received reinforcement. Now you say, okay, well, Mike, what does that have to do with this? Well, what it has to do is very simple. You may watch 50,000 occurrences of a challenging behavior that you're trying to understand before you ever see the positive consequence that's actually maintaining the behavior. It could be 50,000, it could be 10,000, it could be 500, it doesn't matter. Eventually you're going to give up and you're not going to be able to figure out what the true antecedents of consequences are that are evoking and eventually maintaining this challenging behavior. Without knowing those in advance and taking data in this manner, do I think you're wasting your time? No more than I think you're wasting your time with indirect measures like the MAS and the FAST and the PBQ, because I think this helps to more solidify your definition of the challenging behavior, and it begins to give you some information that you can use in next steps. The functional assessment direct observation, or FADO, that you find in the O'Neill book is something that I find to be very useful. This is essentially an ABC recording sheet, but it is done in a much better way. Now I know this is difficult for you to read, but you can open your book and look at it. Basically what you do is list several target behaviors. You list what the setting events are when the behaviors occur. You identify for the person in advance what some of the antecedents are. Transitions, interruption, being told no, being told to wait, are all very classic antecedents that may evoke a challenging behavior. What is the actual consequence for the behavior? The person's being threatened, they're getting attention, they're being ignored. And then the last is what's the perceived function, and what you should do is record that for each of the different occurrences of the behavior. So this is a much more structured way of doing it. Brian Iwata and his colleagues came up with something that they call the structured behavior assessment form, which is very similar to this one. They're all essentially the same form. We use this form a lot. It gives you a lot more information than the straight ABC form, and it also sort of guides the person taking the data and prompts them to what some of the antecedents and consequences could possibly be. So in my opinion, if you're going to do an ABC recording, which most of us do, at least as initial assessment, this form, or the one by Iwata and his colleagues, which is in the package of material on my website, is the better way to go than just a straight open-ended ABC recording. You can see here that under setting events, antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, that you can say for setting events that the person's in a large group, the person's in a small group, how often that occurs, whether demands were placed on the person, what the behavior, whether it was aggression or out of seat, and what the consequences were. And it's just a way of adding it up and coming up with some objective measure of what may be maintaining and evoking the behavior. As far as direct observation is concerned, the scatter plot has always been one of my favorites. Sorry for the problem with the PowerPoint here. Scatter plot has always been one of my favorites. It was published by Touchette et al. In 1985. And basically what you do is you use a partial interval recording system, and you record the occurrence and non-occurrence of behavior in brief intervals, sometimes as short as 10 seconds, sometimes as long as half an hour. And you're basically looking at that completed over 1 or more weeks. So what we want to find is a pattern of behavior. In the particular example that I'm going to show you, this is a data sheet that you can use for a scatter plot recording. It's got the activity, the time of the day, what day of the week it is that the behavior is occurring, and then the way of summarizing it in each way. This is a way of sort of graphically displaying the behavior. And now, sorry about that. And now we're looking only at time of the day and day of the week. But you can also list this for individuals that may be involved with the person being served, activities, or any number of other things that may influence the behavior. In this particular example, the behavior, as you will see, is occurring just before lunch. Quite possible that the person is engaging in the challenging behavior because they're hungry. It just helps to give you a better idea of what's going on with the person. We take scatterplot data not only by time of day, but by who is with the person, what environment they're in, and what activity they're engaging in, because what we may find from time to time is there's a particular staff that tends to evoke the behavior. Whether they're doing something wrong or not is irrelevant. That particular staff may be involved more often than not. It may be in a certain environment more often than not, or a certain time of the day. And those are answers to questions that really can help you in beginning to narrow down this analysis that you're doing in trying to develop a reasonable hypothesis. It's also very important that you find the times, the people, and the settings where the behavior doesn't occur or is less likely to occur. In the example I had before, there was only one time that it occurred prior to 11 o'clock. So that I think that tells you a lot, that in the mornings this person hardly ever engages in those behaviors, but once you get close to lunch they do begin to do it. Touchette looked at aggression and self-injury. There were two adolescents, a young adult and a young adult with autism, and they did both occurrence and non-occurrence across observers, and subjects got 100% inter-observer reliability. O'Reilly, 1995, replicated the Touchette study with adult males with severe mental retardation, sleep deprivation, and aggression. Again, they got 100% inter-observer reliability on their data as well. Again, I think the scatter plot is a great way to take data, and I think the contribution of Touchette and McDonald and their colleagues was something that was really remarkable. It's been Simons, 1998, replicated the study with emotionally maladaptive behavior population and was able to do a good job with that as well. Fox et al. Looked at emotional maladaptive behaviors and was able to replicate the study there. So basically what you've got is scatter plots now are something that has been systematically replicated with a variety of different populations, and it's something that we can use no matter who we're trying to evaluate and come up with good data. I think that some of the things that need to be done is a replication of scatterplot with more emotional maladaptive behaviors, students and teachers, and try to get more information with that population. We need to do some reliability studies, sequential FIDO or matrix observation studies, sort of like the Zarconi study did with the motivational assessment scale. And we need to look at predictive validity of observation systems to identify triggering antecedents, consequences that provoke and maintain challenging behaviors, comparison to other instruments, environmental manipulation results. So what we're suggesting here, or what I'm suggesting here, is that we need to do the FIDO, we need to do the scatter plot, and then we need to do an analog functional analysis and see if the data correlates and we get similar results.